the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. Ed Treacy is Vice President, Supply Chain and Sustainability at Produce Marketing Association, also known as PMA. He monitors and forecasts trends related to produce and floral supply chain efficiencies, and designs and maintains related products, services, and educational events for PMA members. He serves as a staff lead and technical resource to the industry-wide Produce Traceability Initiative and leads all data synchronization and alignment initiatives for PMA. Now on to the episode with Ed. Welcome back, Dave and John. I'm excited to see another new face today. Ed, thank you for joining us as a guest on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We have quite a few questions prepared for you regarding PMA and the impact of climate change and sustainability on the food supply chain. But before we get into those questions, Ed, could you start off by explaining what PMA is and what your role is within the organization?
Sure. Produce Marketing Association is the only global trade association representing the entire supply chain that handles and sells fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, and floral, which is sold at retail grocery stores. We don't handle flower shops and things like that in garden centers, and that's because they're sold as part of the produce department in retailers. And my role for the last 11 years, well, for about 8 years, was vice president of supply chain. And for the last 3 years, I've added sustainability. So I'm the VP of supply chain and sustainability.
Okay, so Ed, thank you. We're looking forward to your input because, as you just described, you've got some heavy lifting, and it's a big area to work in. I'm interested, based on your background, how do you see climate change impacting the food supply chain distribution in North America from your lens?
A couple ways, probably more than a couple, but one, when you talk about climate change, we're really talking about changes in weather patterns. And in our industry, the weather is probably the biggest friend and biggest foe for our growers to grow fruits, vegetables, and floral, no matter where you're growing. And they have had to be fairly resilient in dealing with different weather, be it hurricanes or unexpected frost or droughts and all of the above. So our industry is quite used to dealing with it. They don't like it sometimes. And if you get a couple of calamities, if you will, for weather at the same time, and, if Florida has a hurricane and Mexico has a frost at the same time, the supply goes down, the price goes up, and those who have make a lot of money. Those who have not are out of luck and rely on insurance or their reserves. And so that's how they're practically dealing with, and I'm not so sure it's changing all that much. It's random. We always have hurricanes and tornadoes in certain parts of the country and the world. Some areas are prone to droughts more than others, and high and low temperatures, but that's things they've learned how to deal with. Where it's really affecting the business and rather affecting everyone through the supply chain is everyone wants to know what companies are doing, how their business practices are not contributing to emitting greenhouse gases into the environment. Companies are being asked to measure and report their carbon footprint. And so that's the business side besides the growing. And it is a somewhat loosely defined area right now. Everyone's kind of feeling their way in the dark, and they want to report on this. And you get major buyers with major initiatives to reduce greenhouse gases, and they're leaning on their supply chain all the way back to the grower to report what you're doing and what your progress is and how you're reducing the negative impact in the environment.
Is that because the retailers are recognizing that there is a risk associated with products being delivered on time or available as frequently as they have been in the past? I recognize weather patterns have always been an issue or a challenge with farms, but are retail chains actually seeing or worried about this risk increasing and having an impact? Is that a factor driving this, or is it just because it's kind of a trendy thing now that people are asking for this? I'm kind of curious where that is.
The primary driver prior to COVID was investors are asking for it now. They're measuring companies on their environmental and social goals and assessing the risk of the business and putting a value on that. Consumers are asking. And in some parts of the world, the government regulations have them doing things and reporting things and showing a reduction. So there's the investor and the consumer side of it are really what drew the big buyers, not just retailers, but food service operators and distributors and others, to be aware of what they're doing to the environment and report back on that. Since COVID, and more specifically this year with COVID, people are concerned about the continuity of the supply chain. When we've got 50 plus ships sitting in the harbor and off of Port of LA, and goods can't come in, goods can't go out, we've seen a disruption in the supply chain. And that is affecting probably less so in the fresh produce. Yeah, we have a number of companies, especially this time of year, the apple and tree fruit companies who have a huge or had a huge business exporting to Asia and other parts of the world. They're having a lot of trouble getting equipment and getting their product on ships and where it needs to be. Domestically, we're 50% of the fruit consumed in this country is imported, much less so, probably 15 or 20% of vegetables. It shifts around depending on the growing pattern from north to south, south to north. And most of that is handled by truck. And the labor side, issues aside, because everyone, not just our industry, is struggling to find qualified labor. Looking at the resilience of the supply chain is now a reason they're paying a lot more attention to it. We never had to worry about that prior to COVID. And one phenomenon we're seeing, or the result we're seeing, is prices to move truckloads have gone through the ceiling. They're an all-time high, not predicted to change. And that will almost be solved by money. You can convince people to move your load if you pay them enough money. And we compete with all the other commodities that move by truck, and we're probably the least favorite freight out there. That's why we pay more than anyone. We put a lot of responsibility on the trucking company and transport driver for maintaining, hitting the pickup time on time, delivering it on time, making sure the temperature doesn't vary more than 1 or 2 degrees in the humidity and the ethylene and shock. And there's all sorts of ways you can damage fresh produce, where if you're hauling car parts or cornflakes, if you show up a day late to the retailer, it doesn't matter. They have 2 weeks inventory on hand. You show up a day late with a load of strawberries, you're probably not unloading because they've already sourced that from somewhere else. Now the trucker owns a load of strawberries.
Wow.
So, yeah. And in the US, the government is now getting involved to it based on what we've experienced. And the federal government have an initiative to look at the resilience of the food supply chain and what do they need to do and what we as industry need to do to make sure that we fortify that and we're never at risk of not being able to feed our country and other parts of the world.
I wonder if I could come in and ask you something. You might gather from the accent, I'm not from North America. I'm located in the UK. And one of the things we hear, you're talking about the supply chain pressure. One of the things we have here, a lot of it is driven by the end retailer. And a good example of this, we have Marks and Spencers who do both food and fashion, but they become a big player in food. And they've now come up with what they call Plan A, because there is no Plan B. And this is a requirement to sort of basically make their entire operation more environmentally friendly. Now, I've worked with some of their suppliers, and what is interesting is you could take a view. It's really easy for them because they say, right, we're going to clean everything up. They have a look at their supply chain and they say, well, it's all of you guys. So then they're putting ratings onto their suppliers to say, you've got to come up to a bronze, gold, whatever standard to remain being a supplier with us. And I was wondering, is this sort of happening in North America?
Yes, it starts with the major retailers. And one of the reasons is, especially it's a little more amplified with fresh produce, that the consumer holds the retailer accountable for the product they're selling. And the reason it's more prevalent in fresh produce is bought and sold as a commodity. And brand really is probably tertiary in a buying decision for a consumer. I'll ask any of the three of you on this call, can you tell me the brand of the last head of iceberg lettuce you bought? Probably not.
No. Can't.
I can guarantee you may be able to recall the price and definitely will talk to me about the quality. They're the two factors that are priorities. And with consumer packaged goods, it's not the same way. And I have an example I use and from personal situation, sent to the store to buy mayonnaise. I don't eat it. My wife does. I come home with the wrong brand. And I know that is on sale. Guess what? I'm heading back to the store and returning that and getting the right brand, where brand is the number one decision factor on certain consumer packaged goods. And because it's commodity and consumers don't really, they probably prefer when they see a brand of strawberries on the shelf from the retailer and now that's nice. But they're still going to flip the clamshell over and look at the bottom, make sure that there's no bruised berries and look at the price and make their buying decision. And next 3 days later, when they go to the same store, there's going to probably be a different brand available for sale of the same product. And because of that, consumers hold the retailers more accountable for the products they buy. And they're asking the retailers, I want to know the story behind the product I'm buying from you. And that's driving a lot of great activity. But the end result of if everyone in the supply chain treats the planet and the people in their company better, then we're all going to leave. And getting that information and reporting that information, that's the big challenge. And then secondarily, once companies assess where they're at, and okay, you're asking me about everything I've been doing in sustainability, and they do a self audit or inventory, then they can see what they're not doing and establish a baseline for improvement. And that's where we're seeing major retailers programs is one, you need to report to me That's good because my consumers are asking and their brand is at risk if they're buying from a company and selling product that uses slave labor or pollutes the environment or does something that the consumers don't like and will not tolerate. They take it out with their checkbooks or their purchase habits with the retailer. And it's becoming more and more important. And as the risk increases, so the retailers are asking their supply network all the way, not just the people they buy from, but the people they buy from, all the way to creation. When the product is grown and harvested, they want to know the entire story because that's their supply chain.
I think that's interesting because we have, I don't know if you have the same terminology that's used sometimes. People are talking about from farm to fork, and they want to know exactly what has happened all along. And it appears that this is driven at the retail end and then pushed down towards the producer end.
Well, that's how most initiatives work in our industry. And more so in fresh foods. I was a grocery retailer for over 20 years. Worked for the number one and number two retailers in Canada and running the warehousing and transportation side of it. It's more, how initiatives get completed and what's common in our industry and more in produce than branded products is they're driven and pulled through the supply chain by the buyer. And I call it the power of the purchase order. And if you don't do this when I'm asking, I won't issue a purchase order. Well, that's more prevalent in fresh produce because for every item a retailer sells or a food service distributor buys, they have probably 50 different options of where they can get strawberries from, if not more. Well, if you're talking to Campbell Soup and you can't be as forceful or persuasive with them because there's only one place you're going to buy Campbell Soup from. And your consumers want Campbell's. They'll want, that's a very strong brand recognized. And well, produce, no, it's a different, there's in any region, any commodity, there are dozens and dozens of suppliers just willing to ship to a retailer. And because of that, they're able to get their wishes, if you will. And it's not malicious. They are very thoughtful of what they ask their supply chain, and they help move the entire industry up. And they do know their role. Retailers absolutely understand in our industry that they can move the industry. Sometimes they're a little gun shy to do it because they don't want to be viewed as the big bad company out there. But we have seen some use it very positively. Food safety audits was a good example. 20 years ago, no growing operation or shipper was doing much with food safety, a formalized food safety program, let alone reporting on it. Retailers got together and said, we need to step up our whole game right through the supply chain. And they started making a requirement of their produce suppliers. If you want to buy or want me to buy from you, I need to have a food safety audit on file, and it needs to be benchmarked against the Global Food Safety Initiative, which ensures a minimum standard, acceptable standard for all audits. And they moved the industry very quickly. And now no one would think of growing and packing and shipping product without having a food safety program and having that program audited, because you won't probably find a buyer for your product.
And it's quite interesting because what you described is an extremely competitive industry. And,
Oh yeah.
And because of there's got to be efficiencies associated in the industry if you want to remain in business. So I recognize that. You've now added sustainability to your title. And I wonder if you can define sustainability, what role energy plays in that arena, the way you see it, per se.
Yeah. The way we have defined it, and we had a task force of our members work together and figure out what role PMA is going to play and try to define it. And that was not an easy task. Sustainability is probably one of the loosest terms or defined terms out there. Talk to anyone, oh, well, that's my sustainability. And I said, it used to be called good management when I was in the industry, and now we're calling it a sustainability initiative. The way we've defined it is it's business practices and initiatives that benefit the planet and the people on it profitably. The 3 Ps: people, planet, profit. And I do, when I say that to people my age, they get it. When I say it to Gen Z and Gen Y, they kind of shudder at profit. Well, no, profit makes the world go round. Without profit, none of us have a paycheck. And you can do all the great and wonderful things for your people and the planet. But if you're not adding to your top or bottom line, you're going to put yourself out of business. Profit is not a bad word. And within sustainability, we have various volunteer committees within PMA, and I put together a very high profile sustainability committee and picked all the leaders in our industry doing great and wonderful things in the world of sustainability. Their first task was working with me. Let's prioritize what areas of focus within sustainability. There are hundreds of various areas you can focus on. And what we came down to was, in order of priority, number 1, packaging, which includes single-use plastic reduction, not elimination, and recycling. There are for some items, single-use plastics are the best alternative, given that when you weigh quality and food safety and everything in, that's where we also focus on recycling. You can't talk about packaging without talking about recycling. The second is food waste and food loss. Food loss is, in our definition, from the time it's harvested and packed until it arrives at the back door of a store or a restaurant. So that's within the supply chain. That's food loss. Food waste is from that point forward to the consumer. And we don't interface a lot with consumers directly. We sit on various committees with consumer advocacy groups, but we have no consumers who are members. Our main focus is on the former, on food loss, and that's where majority of our efforts are. On food waste, there are other organizations doing a great job in educating consumers. And one thing with fresh produce, not everyone realizes, just because it spoils doesn't mean it's unsafe. If it's unsafe, if it had a pathogen when you bought it, by it aging and going beyond its prime, it's not going to introduce a pathogen in your fridge. It's either on there or it's not. And unlike other commodities like beef and milk and things like that, where if it does go beyond its prime, if there is a food safety risk, with fresh produce, it's a quality experience. And yeah, consumers don't always buy or eat what they buy in fresh produce. And we love people to eat everything they buy, because the more fruits and vegetables you eat, the healthier you're going to be. No other commodity can make a claim like that, or a group of products. So packaging, food waste and loss. The third is soil health. Without healthy soil, we're all in trouble. And I know the greenhouse guys and girls give me a little bit of heat on that, where they are not, some of them do not grow in soil. They do use a different substrate, but leave that aside. The fourth is social responsibility and focus on labor. And our main effort in that is promotion of the ethical charter for responsible labor practices that we help the industry put together. And it's basically a code of conduct that says you're going to respect your people and the laws of the land that you operate in, and have mechanisms that make sure you have proper checks and balances in the area of labor. The fifth, and you'll be glad to hear this, is renewable energy, alternative energy, and which includes energy efficiency. We use a lot of energy in our industry, in the packing houses, on the trucks, and on the tractors. And energy is a big cost. And our members as a whole are always looking to be more efficient with their energy use, explore new and innovative alternative energy, such as solar and wind and other things. Our sixth is water. We need clean and ample water to grow our products. It's not an issue everywhere in the world, but it is an issue in many parts of the world. And the seventh is the world of carbon and greenhouse gases. And that was just added in probably the last 8 or 9 months, as it's being talked about more. And our role in that is really educating what's available, either best practices, how they can take advantage of carbon markets, and just trying to explain that whole unknown world to our members. And our role within those 7 areas is we want to inspire our members to adopt business practices and initiatives in these 7 areas. Our focus is on these 7 areas. That 6th affect the planet. The 7th is affects people. And we're doing it through a number of means. And our industry works best by learning what their competitor and friend did. And so we've curated 11 or 12 case studies across the 7 areas where we're real practical examples of this company did this, and here's how they did it, here's the result, and here's how it affected my top or bottom line, to the extent that they're able to share that. We do webinars on at least 1 year on the 7 topic areas. We recently released, and through the idea came from my volunteer committee, and a lot of the input came from them. One of the challenges our industry has is we don't like to talk and brag about ourselves. And what we found in talking to people and doing research, and my own experience, and I've been on hundreds of growing operations, and I point out, oh, I like what you're doing with your drip irrigation. That's a sustainable initiative. Oh, no, it's not. I've been doing it that way. My father did that, and I think his father started it. And well, no, you've got, that's a water conservation methodology initiative. You need to tell people about that when they ask. And so what we created was an online assessment tool that they could go through, answer dozens of questions, and the end result, the output is, here's where you have something to talk about, that you're doing something in one of these 7 areas. They're aligned with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. It's available to PMA members. They're finding it beneficial. Go, wow, I never realized. And it's not a quick thing to fill out, because you really got to know your company and your practices, but it asks all the right questions and probing questions. And then the second online tool we released in conjunction with that is how to tell your sustainability story, because we're very good at growing and packing and shipping and selling fresh fruits and vegetables and floral. We're not very good at bragging about ourselves. And so we had another group, primarily marketing people, craft together a online tool that says, okay, once you've done the assessment, what you have to share, now here's how you share. And it goes through all the steps in defining who your target audience is and what medium you want to send it out. And it's quite a useful guide for our members.
Just a quick follow-up, because I'm so glad you mentioned the energy, the water, and the carbon, and that sounds like you're doing some good work there. But from your experience in dealing with your members, what do you think the biggest challenge they have in actually managing energy, water, carbon more effectively? What do you think their biggest challenge is? Or what are you hearing from them to actually make a difference in that area?
Let me deal with those individually. Energy, and what we're finding out about our couple of case studies we have out there, a lot of them didn't think that they could afford doing solar or wind or combination. They didn't like the energy bill, but they thought that, well, it's only for the very big companies and I can possibly afford to do that. And it's not going to have the return on investment, and it's going to be a non-cost, and it's cheaper to buy it off the grid. And what we're finding is, and that's why we're doing these case studies, no, you can do it. It doesn't have to be a 10,000 acre farm to get an ROI. And we're also having conversations with companies around everything from getting on a proper light bulb replacement program in your distribution centers, reviewing your cycle time of your refrigeration equipment, because we all use it, and considering using some kind of a management system on that will pay for itself in months and not years. Yeah, it was really a lot of misunderstanding or not having enough knowledge that you can do these programs. It's not going to break the bank. And a lot of the energy programs have a fairly quick return. And within 12, 24 months, you're going to pay it off and then benefit from that point forward.
Is it possible they had the mindset that they thought energy wasn't controllable, and now that they dug into it, they realize, hey, wait a minute, we can do something? Is that?
Yeah, they look at it as almost as a fixed cost. It's cost of doing business. And frankly, they're great at planting and harvesting and marketing and packing. They all use energy, but that's kind of outside their wheelhouse of expertise. And there was, they just viewed it as, well, it's always going to be that. And I can't do anything about it. And they complain when the utility prices go up, but that's about all they've done. And we've seen some really cool examples out there. We have a recent case study, Hortifruti in Chile. They put floating solar panels on their retention ponds.
Yes.
And they didn't have big, huge thousands and thousands of acres that they needed to carve off 100 to put solar panels. They got creative and said, well, I got these huge retention ponds and there's nothing on top of them. And that's cool. And because with solar, one of the challenges is they take up real estate, and their real estate, they'd rather be planting in the ground rather than putting a solar panel. Yeah, a lot of them put them across their packing sheds and coolers. They'll put panels on top, but that's not enough to drive their operations. Another one we saw in energy with Limonera, and we have a case study, they became a beta site for Tesla batteries, and they used wind, and they stored the energy, and I think wind and solar, they stored the energy with using Tesla batteries, and they're able to shave off their usage off the peak times, where in California, the rates go through the roof in the middle of the day and they're very cheap at night or cheaper at night. And they're able to rebalance that using alternative energy stored in Tesla batteries, and very, very successful. And it actually opened, I believe, it validated that Tesla could do something on a large scale and probably help their marketing as well. In the world of water, that's always been an issue, and quality of water and supply of water. And the main focus on that is getting efficient, drip irrigation, putting the water exactly where it's needed, only what's needed. And there's all sorts of development on technologies that are analyzing sensors in the ground that are determining when and how much is the proper amount of water, rather than just spraying the entire field and a fixed amount. And everyone's realizing and has known the quality water. We got to test our water. We got to do inline testing and constant monitoring. Checking it once or twice a year is probably not good enough, depending on the source. We've got Mother Nature out there. We got birds flying over and dropping things in ponds, and yeah, it's a reality. And we've got to make sure we take precautions against it. And there's a number of filtering and other mechanisms they can use. And then the world of carbon and greenhouse gases and climate, that's really the unknown. It's the abyss out there. And we're working, trying to explain that to our members. We have a webinar, virtual town hall, I think it's their second this year, on energy and or on the carbon world. And one of the unknowns out there is the carbon market and how they can take advantage. And most people think, and some of it may be reality, if there is so much money available, all the row croppers who have hundreds of thousands of acres and are able to do no tillage programs and things like that, they're going to take all that and there'll be not a lot left for us. Some of our commodities, no tillage doesn't work. It's not something we can do. Now, in the orchards, yeah, different world. And we're educating them that one of the best methods is roots that stay in the ground, and you don't pull them up every 6 weeks or 6 months or every year. And they will be able to take some advantage when that market in this country is very immature and it's evolving, and there are different rules and control mechanisms. So it's really, we're trying to help explain that. And we will be doing the best practice for growers guidance document. And that'll obviously have to be by type of farming, very different than a berry patch. It's just educating them on what they can do and what works and what are the best practices. And that's a global issue. There are some parts of the world that are more advanced in that and have more advanced programs and funding and education available. This country, we're probably on the latter half. We're behind probably the average of the world. Even our neighbors north in Canada, they're much more advanced in the carbon world and understanding what can be done and how to take advantage.
So you raise a very good point, because I think our listeners a lot of listeners would be purchasers of carbon credits, but your clients could be actually not only possibly purchasing, but they also could be selling carbon credits as well. So you've got a great opportunity at even introducing buyers to sellers in your business too. It sounds like that's a great opportunity for the association to initiate or help out on that as far as
our role is really educating them of what can be done and then how they go about taking advantage of it. And yeah, and that's still evolving. And one of the questions I get asked, well, how can we as industry ensure that we're not double or people are not selling the same credit twice?
Yes.
And there's a bunch of bright people, technologists working on that, and it's still not. I don't think the work in that area is finished yet. They'll figure it out.
Sure.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation next week. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.